You know that feeling when your whole world shifts in a single moment? When everything you thought you knew about your family, about yourself, about life itself, gets turned completely upside down? That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, sitting in a stuffy law office in downtown Phoenix, watching my cousins laugh at what they thought was my grandfather's final insult to me. A $5 check. 5 measly dollars. But what they didn't know, what none of us knew, was that there was a second envelope. And when that attorney opened it, the smirks on their faces disappeared faster than water in the Arizona desert. I'm Sarah. And if you're someone who's ever felt like the black sheep of your family, like you never quite belonged, then you're going to want to stick around for this story. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about money or inheritance. It's about discovering who you really are when everyone else has already decided who you should be. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why I had to share this with all of you. So if you're ready for a story that'll make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and hidden truths, hit that subscribe button and let's dive in together. The story really begins 23 years ago when I was just 7 years old. My parents died in a car accident on Interstate 10, just outside of Tucson. Black ice, they said. Freak weather for Arizona. I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room, my little legs swinging from the chair that was too big for me, watching adults whisper in corners with faces full of pity. I didn't understand what gone forever meant back then. I kept asking when Mommy and Daddy were coming to take me home. That's when my grandfather, Robert Mitchell, stepped in. Grandpa Rob, as I called him, was my dad's father. He was this tall, weathered man with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He owned a small construction company in Phoenix, nothing fancy, but he'd built it from the ground up with his own 2 hands. When he walked into that hospital room and knelt down beside my chair, I'll never forget what he said. "Sarah, sweetheart, you're coming home with me now. And I promise you, as long as I'm breathing, you'll never be alone. But here's the thing about family. Not everyone was happy with Grandpa Rob's decision. See, my dad had 3 brothers, and they all had kids of their own. My cousins Marcus, Jennifer, and David were all older than me, and their parents. Well, let's just say they thought Grandpa Rob was making a mistake. I remember overhearing my Uncle Tom telling my Aunt Linda that it wasn't fair for the old man to waste his retirement on raising another kid. Uncle Mike said I should go to foster care, that it would be better for everyone involved. And Uncle Steve? He just kept shaking his head, muttering about how this was going to complicate things down the road. But Grandpa Rob didn't care what his sons thought. He took me home to his modest house on Maple Street with its creaky wooden floors and the smell of coffee always brewing in the kitchen. He cleared out his old office and turned it into my bedroom, painting the walls pink because he'd heard somewhere that little girls liked pink. He was wrong about that, but I never had the heart to tell him. That pink room became my sanctuary, my safe place in a world that suddenly felt very uncertain. Growing up with Grandpa Rob was like living with a gentle giant. He taught me how to use tools, how to fix things that were broken, how to stand up for myself when other kids made fun of my hand-me-down clothes. He never missed a school play, never forgot to pack my lunch, never made me feel like I was a burden. But every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday party, I could feel the tension. My cousins would get expensive gifts, new clothes, college funds. I'd get something practical from the hardware store and a $20 bill that Grandpa Rob would slip into my hand when no one was looking. The whispers followed me everywhere. At family barbecues, I'd hear Aunt Linda telling the other women that it was such a shame how I was being raised. Uncle Tom would make comments about how I was too rough around the edges and needed a woman's touch. Uncle Mike would just stare at me like I was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. And my cousins? They treated me like I was their personal entertainment, always finding ways to remind me that I didn't really belong. Marcus, the oldest, was the worst. He was 6 years older than me, and he used that age gap like a weapon. He'd tell me stories about how my parents had really died, making up horrible details that would give me nightmares for weeks. He'd hide my belongings and then watch me search for them, laughing when I started to cry. Jennifer wasn't much better. She was the princess of the family, always dressed in the latest fashions, always reminding me that my clothes came from thrift stores and garage sales. And David? He was the quiet one, But his silence was almost worse than the other's cruelty. He'd just watch everything happen with this look in his eyes, like he was studying me, trying to figure out what made me tick. High school was particularly brutal. While my cousins were driving cars their parents bought them, I was riding the bus. While they were planning elaborate Sweet 16 parties, I was working part-time at the local diner to help Grandpa Rob with expenses. I never asked him for money for anything I didn't absolutely need, because I could see the worry lines around his eyes getting deeper every year. His construction business was struggling, and I knew taking care of me wasn't making things any easier. But you know what? Despite all of it, Grandpa Rob never once made me feel like I was anything less than his most precious treasure. Every morning he'd make me breakfast and ask about my dreams from the night before. Every evening, we'd sit on the back porch and he'd tell me stories about my dad when he was growing up, about the mischief they'd get into together. He'd tell me I had my father's eyes, my mother's smile, and a heart bigger than both of them combined. "Sarah," he'd say, his voice rough from years of shouting over construction noise, "don't you ever let anyone make you feel small. You've got something special in you, something that can't be bought or sold or inherited. You've got character, and that's worth more than all the money in the world." I believed him mostly, but teenagers are cruel, and small towns have long memories. Everyone knew I was the orphan girl being raised by her grandfather. Everyone knew we didn't have much money. Everyone knew I was different. And different in a place like Phoenix, Arizona, wasn't always a good thing. College was my escape plan. I studied harder than anyone else, worked every job I could find, and applied for every scholarship available. When I finally got accepted to Arizona State University with a partial scholarship, Grandpa Rob cried. Actually cried. I'd never seen him cry before, not even at my parents' funeral. He hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack, and he whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, so damn proud." But even then, the family drama followed me. Uncle Tom made comments about how I was too big for my britches and forgetting where I came from. Uncle Mike wondered out loud why Grandpa Rob was wasting money on my education when I'd probably just end up pregnant and dropping out anyway. And Uncle Steve? He just shook his head and muttered about how college was putting ideas in my head that would only lead to disappointment. My cousins were even worse. Marcus had flunked out of community college and was living in his parents' basement, but he still found ways to make me feel inferior. Jennifer was working at a nail salon and acting like she was some kind of businesswoman, constantly making snide remarks about how I was trying to be something I'm not. David had gotten into Arizona State too, but his parents were paying his full tuition, buying him a car, setting him up in a nice apartment. Meanwhile, I was living in the cheapest dorm on campus, eating ramen noodles for dinner and working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore. But I persevered. I had to. Not just for myself, but for Grandpa Rob. He'd sacrificed so much for me, and I was determined to make him proud. I majored in business administration, thinking maybe I could help him with his construction company when I graduated. I dreamed of expanding it, modernizing it, making it successful again. I wanted to give back to the man who'd given me everything. That's when things started getting really complicated. During my junior year, I noticed Grandpa Rob was getting tired more easily. He'd always been this unstoppable force, but suddenly he was napping in the afternoon, moving slower, forgetting things. When I came home for Christmas break, I was shocked at how frail he looked. His clothes were hanging loose on his frame, his hands were shaking slightly, and there was something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. I confronted him about it, and after a lot of pushing, he finally admitted that he'd been to the doctor. The news wasn't good. Lung cancer. Stage 3. All those years of construction work, breathing in dust and chemicals, had finally caught up with him. The doctor said he had maybe 6 months, maybe a year if he was lucky, and responded well to treatment. My world crumbled. This man who'd been my rock, my anchor, my everything, was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I wanted to drop out of school, come home, take care of him, but he wouldn't hear of it. "Sarah," he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, "you're going to finish college. You're going to graduate. You're going to make something of yourself. That's what your parents would have wanted, and that's what I want too." So I did. I finished my junior year, though I have no idea how. I spent every weekend at home, helping Grandpa Rob with whatever he needed. I watched him get thinner, watched him struggle with the chemotherapy, watched him fight with everything he had. And through it all, he never complained. Not once. He just kept telling me how proud he was, how much he loved me, how much my parents would have loved the woman I was becoming. My uncles and their families started coming around more once word got out about Grandpa Rob's diagnosis. Suddenly, everyone was very concerned about his well-being. Uncle Tom started offering to help with the business, even though he'd never shown any interest before. Uncle Mike began talking about family obligations and how they all needed to pull together. Uncle Steve started visiting every Sunday, bringing flowers and acting like he'd been the devoted son all along. But I could see what was really happening. They were circling like vultures, waiting for the inevitable. They'd make their polite inquiries about his health, bring him soup that he couldn't eat, and then they'd have these hushed conversations in the kitchen that would stop the moment I walked in. I heard fragments of their discussions. Words like estate and will and what's fair floated through the air like smoke. My cousins were just as transparent. Marcus suddenly started calling Grandpa Rob every week, asking about his health, reminiscing about the good old days that I was pretty sure had never existed. Jennifer began bringing her new boyfriend around, introducing him as her future fiancé and making comments about how she'd always been Grandpa Rob's favorite granddaughter. David started asking questions about the construction business, about properties, about investments. It was disgusting, but I couldn't say anything. Grandpa Rob was dying, and the last thing I wanted was to cause family drama during his final months. Senior year was a blur of classes, part-time work, and weekend trips home to Arizona. I watched Grandpa Rob deteriorate week by week, month by month. The chemotherapy wasn't working. The cancer was spreading. The doctors were running out of options. But he never gave up hope, and he never stopped believing in me. In May, 2 weeks before my graduation, I got the call. Grandpa Rob was in the hospital, and the doctors didn't think he'd make it through the night. I drove straight from Tempe to Phoenix, breaking every speed limit between the two cities. When I got to his room, he was awake, waiting for me. His eyes were sunken, his skin was gray, but when he saw me, he smiled that same smile that had comforted me since I was 7 years old. "There's my college girl," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Did you graduate yet?" "Next week, Grandpa. I'm going to graduate next week. I'm sorry I won't be there to see it." "Don't talk like that. You're going to beat this. You're going to be fine." He reached out with his trembling hand and took mine. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me. I need you to know how much you mean to me. You saved my life, sweetheart. After your daddy died, I didn't know what I was living for anymore. But then you came along, and you gave me purpose again. You gave me hope. You gave me 23 years of joy that I never would have had otherwise. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. Grandpa, you saved my life. You gave me everything. You loved me when nobody else would. That's not true, Sarah. Your parents loved you more than life itself. And I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But there's something else I need to tell you, something important." That's when he told me about the will. He'd been working with an attorney, making arrangements, trying to ensure that I'd be taken care of after he was gone. But he also warned me that my uncles and cousins weren't going to be happy with his decisions. He told me to stay strong, to remember who I was, to never let anyone make me feel less than I was worth. "There's going to be a reading of the will," he said, "and I want you to be there. I want you to hold your head high no matter what happens. Can you do that for me?" I promised him I would. I held his hand all night, telling him stories about college, about my professors, about my dreams for the future. I told him about the job offer I'd received from a marketing firm in San Diego, about how I was thinking of taking it, about how I wanted to make him proud. He listened to every word, smiling weakly, squeezing my hand whenever I said something that particularly pleased him. He died just as the sun was coming up, peacefully, with me holding his hand. The last thing he said to me was, "I love you, Sarah. Never forget that. Never forget who you are." The funeral was a circus. People came out of the woodwork, distant relatives I'd never met, business associates who hadn't spoken to Grandpa Rob in years, neighbors who'd barely acknowledged his existence when he was alive. But they all had stories to tell, all claimed to have special memories, all acted like they'd been close friends with him. My uncles played the role of grieving sons perfectly. They gave touching eulogies, shared heartwarming anecdotes, and accepted condolences with appropriate solemnity, but I could see the calculations in their eyes, the way they were already dividing up his possessions in their minds. My cousins were just as bad, whispering among themselves about what they hoped to inherit, making comments about how the house would need to be sold and the money divided equally. I graduated 3 days after the funeral. I walked across that stage alone, with no one in the audience cheering for me, and accepted my diploma with tears streaming down my face. Grandpa Rob should have been there. He'd earned the right to see me graduate more than anyone. But instead, he was gone, and I was truly alone for the first time since I was 7 years old. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and I honestly didn't care about money or possessions. I just wanted my grandfather back, but I'd made him a promise, and I intended to keep it. The attorney's office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Charles Morrison, Esquire, was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who'd been practicing for 40 years. Gray hair, expensive suit, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of serious demeanor that made you want to sit up straight and speak quietly. My uncles were already there when I arrived, along with their wives and children. They'd dressed for the occasion, everyone in their best funeral attire, looking appropriately somber. But I could feel the anticipation in the room, the barely contained excitement about what they were about to inherit. Uncle Tom had brought a notepad and was already making lists. Uncle Mike kept checking his phone, probably calculating property values and researching estate laws. Uncle Steve was trying to look devastated, but I could see the dollar signs in his eyes. My cousins were clustered together, whispering and giggling like they were at a party instead of a will reading. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and began the formal proceedings. He explained the legal terminology, outlined the process, and then began reading from the thick document in front of him. Most of it was standard legal language, but then he got to the specific bequests. To my son Thomas, I leave my collection of woodworking tools and my pickup truck. Uncle Tom looked pleased. The tools were valuable, and the truck was only 2 years old. To my son Michael, I leave my fishing boat and all associated equipment. Uncle Mike actually smiled. He'd always complained that Grandpa Rob never let him use the boat enough. To my son Stephen, I leave my coin collection and my war medals. Uncle Steve nodded approvingly. The coin collection was worth several $1,000s, and the medals had sentimental value. To my grandson Marcus, I leave my watch collection. Marcus looked satisfied. Grandpa Rob had some nice watches, including a Rolex that his father had given him. To my granddaughter Jennifer, I leave my mother's jewelry collection. Jennifer actually squealed with delight. She'd been eyeing those pieces for years. To my grandson David, I leave my stamp collection and my first edition books. David seemed content with his inheritance. He'd always been interested in collecting. Then Mr. Morrison paused, looking directly at me. And to my granddaughter Sarah, I leave the sum of $5. The room went dead silent. Then, slowly, the silence was broken by snickering. First from Marcus, then from Jennifer, then from David. Soon, all of my cousins were laughing, and my uncles were exchanging glances that clearly said, "Well, that's what she gets." Uncle Tom was the first to speak. $5? That's it? That's all the old man left her? Uncle Mike was shaking his head. I guess he finally came to his senses. 23 years of supporting her, and this is how he ends it. Uncle Steve was actually chuckling. Well, at least she can buy herself a cup of coffee. My cousins were beside themselves with laughter. Marcus was wiping tears from his eyes. $5 whole! Sarah, you're rich! Jennifer was practically cackling. Oh my God, I can't believe it. All these years, and that's what she gets. David was trying to look sympathetic, but I could see the smirk on his face. I mean, it's something, right? Better than nothing. I felt like the room was spinning. This couldn't be right. Grandpa Rob had loved me. He'd raised me. He'd sacrificed everything for me. How could he leave me nothing but $5? How could he humiliate me like this in front of the entire family? But then I remembered his words from the hospital. Hold your head high, no matter what happens. So I did. I sat there, silent and dignified, while my family laughed at what they thought was my final rejection by the man who'd raised me. Mr. Morrison was watching me carefully, and I could see something in his eyes that looked almost like anticipation. He cleared his throat again, and the laughter died down. "However," he continued, "there is one more item to address." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second envelope, this one sealed with red wax. Mr. Mitchell left specific instructions that this envelope was to be opened only after the initial reading of the will, and only in the presence of all beneficiaries. The room went quiet again. My uncles were looking puzzled. My cousins had stopped laughing. Everyone was staring at the envelope in Mr. Morrison's hands. "What is it?" Uncle Tom asked. "I don't know," Mr. Morrison replied. "I was instructed not to open it until this moment." He carefully broke the wax seal and removed a single sheet of paper. As he read it, his eyebrows went up, and I saw him glance at me with something that looked like surprise, maybe even respect. "Well," he said quietly, "this is unexpected." "What does it say?" Uncle Mike demanded. Mr. Morrison looked around the room, making eye contact with each person before settling his gaze on me. "It says, if Sarah is reading this, then she kept her promise to hold her head high and maintain her dignity even when faced with what appeared to be rejection and humiliation. Sarah, you have just passed the final test of character that I designed for you. The $5 bequest was never meant to be your real inheritance. It was meant to reveal the true nature of our family members and to prove to everyone in this room what I have always known about you, that you are a person of substance, grace, and integrity." The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. My cousins weren't laughing anymore. My uncles weren't smirking. Everyone was staring at Mr. Morrison, waiting for him to continue. The letter goes on to say, "Mr. Morrison, please, now reveal the contents of the safety deposit box at First National Bank, access to which I have given exclusively to Sarah Mitchell. The key is in the smaller envelope attached to this letter." Mr. Morrison reached into the larger envelope and pulled out a tiny envelope, which he handed to me. Inside was a small silver key and another piece of paper. "Sarah," Mr. Morrison said, "would you like me to read this note, or would you prefer to read it yourself?" My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper. It was in Grandpa Rob's handwriting, and it said, "Sweetheart, everything I own, everything I've worked for, everything I've saved, belongs to you. The house, the business, the life insurance policy, the savings accounts, the investments I made over the years that nobody knew about. You are my sole heir, and you always have been. I love you more than words can express. Use what I'm giving you to build the life you deserve. Love, Grandpa Rob." I looked up at Mr. Morrison, tears streaming down my face. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means, Sarah, that the will I just read was a decoy. The real will is in that safety deposit box, along with documentation of all your grandfather's assets. Based on my preliminary estimates, I believe you've just inherited approximately $3 million in cash, property, and investments." The room exploded. My uncles started shouting, demanding to know how this was possible. My cousins were screaming about how it wasn't fair, how they deserved their share. Aunt Linda was crying, saying there must be some mistake. But Mr. Morrison held up his hand for silence. "There's more," he said. Mr. Mitchell anticipated that his decision might be challenged, so he prepared a detailed letter explaining his reasoning. "Sarah, again, would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it privately?" "Read it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Morrison pulled out another sheet of paper and began to read. "To my sons and their children, I want you to know that this decision was not made lightly or in anger. It was made with full awareness of your characters and your treatment of Sarah over the years. Thomas, you suggested that Sarah should go to foster care when she was 7 years old. You have spent 23 years making it clear that you believed she was a burden on our family. Michael, you have consistently treated Sarah as an outsider, making cruel comments about her appearance, her intelligence, and her prospects. Stephen, you have watched your brothers and their children torment Sarah for years and have done nothing to stop it." My uncles were staring at the floor, their faces red with embarrassment and anger. "Marcus, Mr. Morrison continued, "You have been particularly cruel to Sarah, tormenting her with stories about her parents' death, hiding her belongings, and generally making her childhood as miserable as possible. Jennifer, you have consistently made Sarah feel inferior because of her financial circumstances, treating her like a servant rather than a cousin. David, your silence in the face of your family's cruelty makes you complicit in their behavior." My cousins were no longer laughing. They were looking at each other, at their parents, at me, with expressions of shock and shame. "Sarah," the letter continued, "has shown more character, more integrity, more kindness and compassion than the rest of you combined. She has never asked me for anything she didn't truly need. She has worked hard to contribute to our household expenses. She has treated me with love and respect, even when the rest of you saw me only as a source of future inheritance. She has earned every penny I'm leaving her, not through blood relation, but through the content of her character." Mr. Morrison paused, looking around the room. The letter concludes with this: "I am not leaving Sarah my money because she is my granddaughter. I am leaving her my money because she is the only person in this room who deserves it. She is the only one who loved me for who I was, not for what I could give her. She is the only one who made my final years joyful instead of lonely. She is the only one who has never disappointed me, never betrayed my trust, never made me question my faith in human nature. Sarah, you are my greatest accomplishment, my greatest joy, and my greatest pride. Use this inheritance to build the life you deserve, and remember that you are loved beyond measure." The silence in the room was deafening. My uncles were staring at their hands, their faces pale. My cousins looked like they'd been slapped. Their wives were crying, whether from shame or disappointment. I couldn't tell. Uncle Tom was the first to speak. "This isn't over. We'll contest this. We'll fight it in court." Mr. Morrison looked at him calmly. Mr. Mitchell anticipated that possibility as well. He spent considerable time and money ensuring that his will is absolutely unbreakable. He had psychological evaluations done to prove his mental competency at the time of signing. He had multiple witnesses. He even had the entire process video recorded. Additionally, he prepared detailed documentation of every cruel comment, every act of neglect, every instance of mistreatment that he witnessed over the years. If you choose to contest this will, all of that documentation will become public record. Uncle Mike stood up abruptly. "This is insane. She's not even his real granddaughter. She's just some orphan he took in." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said quietly, "that's not entirely accurate. Mr. Mitchell asked me to research Sarah's genealogy as part of the estate planning process. Sarah, did you know that your mother was adopted?" I shook my head. I'd never heard that before. "Your mother was adopted by the family that raised her, but her biological parents were Robert and Margaret Mitchell, your grandfather and his first wife, who died in childbirth. Your mother was given up for adoption because your grandfather was only 17 at the time and felt he couldn't raise a child alone. He spent years regretting that decision, and when he married your grandmother years later, he never told her about his first daughter. Your mother was actually your father's half-sister, which means, Sarah, that you are not just Robert Mitchell's granddaughter by marriage. You are his biological great-granddaughter." The room was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my history, about my place in the world, was changing in real time. I was blood-related to Grandpa Rob after all. I was his great-granddaughter, not just his granddaughter by marriage. Your grandfather only discovered this truth when he was researching your parents' backgrounds after their death, Mr. Morrison continued. "It's why he fought so hard to keep you, why he was so determined to raise you himself. He saw it as his chance to make up for the daughter he gave away, to do right by the family he'd lost." I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Everything made sense now. The way Grandpa Rob had always looked at me, the way he'd fought for me, the way he'd loved me so fiercely. It wasn't just because he was a good man. It was because I was his blood, his family, his chance at redemption. My uncles were staring at me like they were seeing me for the first time. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about family, about blood, about belonging. I wasn't the orphan they'd always made me feel like. I was as much a Mitchell as any of them. Jennifer was the first to try to backtrack. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, we didn't know. If we'd known, we would have treated you differently, but it was too late for apologies. 23 years too late. Uncle Tom tried a different approach. Look, Sarah, we're family. We should stick together. Maybe we can work something out, split the inheritance fairly. I stood up, clutching the key to the safety deposit box in my hand. Mr. Morrison, I'd like to go to the bank now and see what's in that box. Of course, he said. I'll drive you there myself. As we walked toward the door, Uncle Mike called out, Sarah, wait, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I turned back to look at them. These people who'd made my life miserable for over 2 decades, who'd treated me like I was worthless, who'd laughed at what they thought was my final humiliation. They were all staring at me with desperate eyes, suddenly realizing that the little girl they'd tormented had just become the richest person in the room. You know what? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Grandpa Rob was right. This whole thing, this fake will, this test, it showed me exactly who each of you really is. And you know what else? It showed me who I really am. I walked out of that office with my head held high, just like I'd promised Grandpa Rob I would. But I wasn't the same person who'd walked in an hour earlier. I was Robert Mitchell's great-granddaughter, and I'd just inherited not just his money, but his legacy of hard work, integrity, and the ability to see people for who they really are. The contents of that safety deposit box were more than I could have imagined. Not just money and property deeds, but photos of my biological grandmother, letters she'd written to my grandfather before she died, documentation of the daughter they'd given up for adoption, and a detailed family tree that showed me exactly where I came from. There were also investment portfolios that Grandpa Rob had been building for years, life insurance policies, and a business plan for expanding the construction company that he'd apparently been working on right up until his death. But the most valuable thing in that box was a final letter addressed to me. In it, Grandpa Rob explained everything. How he'd discovered the truth about my parentage, how he'd spent years trying to find my mother before learning she'd already passed away, how he'd seen my adoption into his family as a gift from God, a chance to make up for the family he'd lost. He'd been planning to tell me the truth about my heritage when I graduated college, but his illness had accelerated his timeline. Sarah, the letter said, you are not just my great-granddaughter by blood. You are my daughter by choice, my granddaughter by love, and my heir by right. Everything I have built, everything I have accomplished, everything I have saved is yours, not because you need it, but because you deserve it. You have proven yourself to be a person of character, integrity, and grace. You have made an old man's final years meaningful and joyful. You have honored your parents' memory and made me proud to call you family. Over the next few weeks, the reality of my inheritance began to sink in. I owned Grandpa Rob's house, his construction business, and enough money to never have to worry about finances again. But more importantly, I had answers to questions I'd been asking my entire life. I knew where I came from. I knew why Grandpa Rob had fought so hard for me. I knew that I truly belonged somewhere, that I was truly loved, that I was truly valued. My uncles and cousins tried to reconnect with me, of course. They called, they wrote letters, they showed up at the house. They wanted to apologize, to explain, to make amends. But it was too little, too late. You can't undo 23 years of cruelty with a few phone calls and some tears. I did eventually speak with each of them, though. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't angry about the inheritance. I was angry about the way they'd treated me, the way they'd made me feel like I didn't belong, the way they'd dismissed my worth as a human being. Money couldn't fix that. Money couldn't undo the damage they'd done to a little girl who'd already lost everything. But I also wanted them to know that I forgave them. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that anger around was only hurting me. Grandpa Rob had taught me that holding on to resentment was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. He'd taught me that the best revenge was living well, being happy, and proving the doubters wrong. So that's what I did. I took that job in San Diego, but I also kept the construction business. I hired a manager to run it day to day, and I used some of the inheritance money to modernize it, expand it, and turn it into the thriving company that Grandpa Rob had always dreamed it could be. I named it Mitchell Family Construction, and I made sure that every employee knew they were working for a company that valued integrity, hard work, and treating people with respect. I also started a scholarship fund for orphaned children who wanted to go to college. I called it the Robert Mitchell Memorial Scholarship, and I made sure that every recipient knew they were valued, that they belonged, that they deserved every opportunity to succeed. And you know what? I found love too. Real love. With someone who saw me for who I really was, not for what I had or didn't have. His name is Jake, and he's a teacher at one of the schools that benefits from my scholarship program. He has no idea about my inheritance when we first meet. To him, I'm just Sarah, the woman who volunteers at the after-school program for underprivileged kids. He falls in love with my heart, not my bank account, and that makes all the difference. When I finally tell him about everything that happened with Grandpa Rob, about the inheritance, about my family, he just holds me and says, "I'm so sorry they put you through that, but I'm so glad it led you to become the person you are today." That's when I know he's the one. That's when I know that all the pain, all the rejection, all the years of feeling like I didn't belong, led me to exactly where I was supposed to be. We get married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at Grandpa Rob's house. I wear my biological grandmother's wedding dress, the one I found in that safety deposit box, and I carry a bouquet of tools instead of flowers, because that's what Grandpa Rob would have wanted. My uncles and cousins aren't invited. Not out of spite, but because this day is about celebrating love, not appeasing people who only showed up when money was involved. But here's the thing that really changed my perspective on everything. About a year after the will reading, I get a call from a private investigator. He tells me that he's been hired by a woman named Patricia Williams, who claims to be my half-sister. At first, I think it's some kind of scam, someone trying to get a piece of my inheritance. But then he sends me documents, photos, DNA test results that prove she's telling the truth. Patricia is 3 years older than me, and she was also adopted. Our mother had another child before she met my father, a daughter she gave up for adoption when she was just 16. Patricia had been searching for her birth family for years, and my parents' obituary had finally given her the lead she needed. She'd been looking for me for over a decade. When we meet, it's like looking in a mirror. We have the same eyes, the same smile, the same stubborn streak that apparently runs in our family. But more than that, we have the same story. She was raised by loving adoptive parents, but she always felt like something was missing. She'd wondered about her birth family, wondered if she had siblings, wondered if she belonged somewhere else. We spend hours talking, sharing stories, filling in the blanks of each other's lives. She tells me about growing up in Oregon, about her adoptive parents who loved her, but could never quite understand her need to find her roots. I tell her about Grandpa Rob, about the inheritance, about discovering the truth about our family. And for the first time in my life, I'm talking to someone who truly understands what it feels like to be searching for where you belong. Patricia doesn't want money from me. She has her own life, her own career as a nurse, her own family. What she wants is connection, relationship, the sister she never knew she had. And what I gain from her is something I never expected, a piece of my mother that I'd never had before. Through Patricia, I learned things about our mother that no one else could have told me. She shows me photos that our mother's adoptive parents had given her, letters that our mother had written to them about her hopes and dreams, stories about the young woman who would eventually become my mom. Patricia helps me understand that our mother's decision to give her up for adoption wasn't about not loving her, but about wanting what was best for her. Just like Grandpa Rob's decision to fight for me wasn't just about duty, but about love. Having Patricia in my life makes me realize that family isn't just about blood or money or inheritance. It's about the people who choose to love you, who fight for you, who see your worth even when you can't see it yourself. Grandpa Rob was my family. Jake is my family. Patricia is my family. And none of that has anything to do with wills or money or what people think you deserve. My uncles and cousins continue to try to reconnect with me over the years. Uncle Tom sends Christmas cards every year with long letters about how much he regrets the way he treated me. Uncle Mike calls on my birthday, always apologizing, always trying to explain why he acted the way he did. Uncle Steve shows up at family funerals, always trying to hug me, always acting like we're close. My cousins reach out on social media, sharing memories that I remember very differently than they do, trying to rewrite history to make themselves look better. But here's what I've learned. You can't force family relationships. You can't make people love you the way you deserve to be loved. And you definitely can't build meaningful connections with people who only want to know you when you have something they want. I don't hate them anymore. I honestly don't feel much of anything toward them anymore. They're just people who happen to be related to me, people who made choices about how to treat me, people who have to live with the consequences of those choices. I hope they're happy. I hope they've learned something from what happened. But I don't need their approval or their love to feel complete. The construction business has thrived beyond my wildest dreams. We've expanded into sustainable building practices, green construction, and affordable housing projects. We employ over 200 people now, and we've been recognized as one of the top construction companies in Arizona. But more importantly, we've built a company culture based on the values that Grandpa Rob taught me: integrity, hard work, treating people with respect, and always doing the right thing even when no one is watching. I've also started speaking at conferences about business ethics, about family dynamics, about overcoming adversity. I tell my story not because I want sympathy, but because I want other people to know that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. I want them to know that sometimes the people who reject you are actually doing you a favor by showing you who they really are. But the most meaningful part of my new life is the scholarship program. Every year, I get to meet dozens of young people who remind me of myself at their age. Kids who've been through foster care, kids who've lost their parents, kids who've been told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough to succeed. I get to look them in the eyes and tell them that they are worthy, that they do belong, that they can achieve anything they set their minds to. One of those kids is a girl named Maria. She's 17, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 9, and has been bounced around between relatives who make it clear that she's a burden. When I meet her, she's angry, defensive, and convinced that the world is against her. But she's also brilliant, determined, and has a heart bigger than anyone realizes. I see myself in Maria immediately. The way she holds her shoulders, the way she looks at people like she's waiting for them to disappoint her, the way she's built walls around her heart to protect herself from more pain. But I also see her potential, her strength, her capacity for greatness. Over the next few months, I mentor Maria through the scholarship application process. I help her with her essays, her interviews, her college applications. But more importantly, I help her understand that her past doesn't define her future, that the people who've rejected her don't determine her worth, that she has every right to dream big and chase those dreams. When Maria gets accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship, she calls me crying. Not just because she's excited, but because she can't believe that someone saw her potential and invested in her future. She tells me that I've changed her life, but the truth is, she's changed mine too. Seeing her succeed, watching her grow into the confident young woman she was always meant to be, reminds me why everything I went through was worth it. Now, 5 years after that day in the attorney's office, I'm sitting in the same house where Grandpa Rob raised me, but it's completely different. The pink walls of my childhood bedroom have been replaced with warm yellow paint. The creaky floors have been refinished. The kitchen has been updated with modern appliances. But the heart of the house, the love that filled these rooms, that's still here. Jake and I are expecting our first child, a little girl we're going to name Margaret, after my biological grandmother. I spend hours in what will be her nursery, talking to her about her great-great-grandfather, about the man who saved my life and made her existence possible. I tell her about integrity, about character, about the importance of treating people with kindness, even when they don't deserve it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grandpa Rob had just split his inheritance equally among all his grandchildren. Would my uncles and cousins have continued to treat me badly? Would I have ever learned the truth about my parentage? Would I have discovered my own strength and resilience? But then I remember that Grandpa Rob always said that everything happens for a reason. He believed that challenges don't break you. They reveal who you really are. He believed that the people who reject you are actually doing you a favor by showing you their true character. And he believed that love, real love, isn't about blood or money or obligation. It's about choice, about seeing someone's worth even when they can't see it themselves. I think about that day in the attorney's office a lot. I think about the moment when everyone was laughing at my $5 inheritance, when I felt smaller and more worthless than I'd ever felt in my life. But I also think about the moment when Mr. Morrison opened that second envelope, when everything changed, when I realized that the person who mattered most had seen my worth all along. The money was nice, don't get me wrong. Financial security is a blessing that I don't take for granted. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the lesson about character, about integrity, about the importance of treating people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. It was the understanding that love isn't about what you can get from someone, but about what you can give to them. And maybe most importantly, it was the realization that I am enough. I am worthy of love, of respect, of belonging. Not because of what I have or what I can provide, but because of who I am. That's a lesson that no amount of money can buy and no amount of rejection can take away. I want to leave you with this thought, because I know some of you watching this might be going through your own struggles with family, with feeling like you don't belong, with wondering if you're worthy of love and respect. You are. You absolutely are. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. Your value isn't measured by what you have or don't have. Your belonging isn't dependent on other people's approval. Sometimes the people who reject you are actually doing you a favor. They're showing you who they really are, and they're pushing you toward the people who will truly appreciate you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the gift of seeing clearly, of understanding that not everyone deserves a place in your life, of recognizing that you have the power to choose who gets to be part of your story. If you're someone who's been made to feel small, who's been told you're not good enough, who's been treated like you don't matter, I want you to know that you do matter. You matter more than you know. And somewhere out there, there's someone who's going to see your worth, who's going to fight for you, who's going to love you exactly as you are. Hold your head high. Keep your dignity. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. And remember that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well, being happy, and proving the doubters wrong. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where people underestimated you or treated you unfairly? Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything you thought you knew? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others realize they're not alone in their struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you are worthy of love and respect regardless of your circumstances, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because you never know who needs to be reminded that they matter, that they belong, that they are enough exactly as they are. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember, no matter what anyone else tells you, you are worthy of all the love, respect, and happiness that life has to offer.